I've learned over a lifetime that the world is far more crowded than most people realize. For me, the line between this reality and the next has always been porous, a thin veil that trembles and occasionally tears. While I have countless stories, the true intensification began when my husband and I bought our first house. It was a charming older home, full of promise, but we quickly discovered it was already occupied. The presence was not benign. It was a heavy, oppressive energy that felt like being watched by something full of malice. It manifested in suffocating nightmares, in shadowy forms that darted just at the edge of my vision, and in a pervasive sense of dread that settled deep in my bones. I was terrified, feeling cornered in my own home. Then, one night, at my absolute breaking point, my bedroom was filled with a brilliant, warm light. In the center of it stood a figure, not with wings or a halo, but radiating a feeling of such profound peace and absolute safety that the oppressive darkness simply dissolved in its presence. I knew, with a certainty that required no explanation, that this was my guardian angel. After that single powerful event, the malevolent presence was gone, and the house was quiet. We eventually moved, and for a short while I enjoyed the silence. Our second house felt normal, a blank slate. About 2 months in, however, the veil tore open again. We were having a casual game night, myself, my husband, and 2 friends sitting around the dining room table playing cards. The mood was light, filled with laughter and the soft shuffling of cards. It was late, around 1 a.m., when a sudden stillness fell over the room. The air grew heavy and cold. I felt a movement in my peripheral vision to my right, and I turned my head to look. Standing there, between the dining room and the entrance to the living room, was a figure so clear and solid it defied all logic. It was the Grim Reaper. Not a shadow or an impression, but a towering form in a black, tattered robe, the hood casting a void of shadow where a face should have been. It held no scythe, but its presence radiated an ancient, soul-crushing finality. A wave of pure, primal fear washed over me, so potent it felt like being submerged in ice. I tried to scream, to move, but my muscles were locked in a state of absolute paralysis. My terror was amplified when I looked across the table and saw the blood had drained from my friend's face. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the exact same spot, her hand frozen mid-air over her cards. She saw it too. We were trapped in a shared nightmare, unable to speak or even flinch as the silent figure stood there, simply observing. It felt like an eternity passed in those few seconds. The figure then moved, not by walking, but by gliding silently across the floor, passing through the living room and disappearing into the hallway. The moment it was gone, the spell broke. We both gasped for air as if we had been holding our breath the entire time. That night ended the illusion of normalcy in that house. Over the years we lived there, the spirits became a constant part of our lives. They were mostly mischievous. Keys would vanish from the hook only to reappear in a locked drawer. Whispers would echo from empty rooms, and guests would often report feeling a cold hand on their shoulder. You do eventually get used to it. The extraordinary slowly becomes your ordinary. 5 years ago, seeking a true fresh start, my husband and I built a brand new house from the ground up. There was no history but our own, no old walls to hold on to forgotten energies. I truly believed this would be our sanctuary, a place finally free from the constant presence of the unexplained. That belief was shattered within the first year. The activity started subtly, then escalated with terrifying speed. One night, I woke with a jolt, feeling that familiar sensation of being watched. At the foot of our bed stood a tall, slender figure cloaked entirely in black, its form absorbing all light. My first panicked thought was that we were being robbed. I nudged my husband awake, whispering frantically. But as he sat up, the figure seemed to recognize it had been seen.
It moved with an unnatural fluid speed, not running, but gliding across the floor and straight into our master bathroom. We heard no door, no footsteps. It just vanished. That was my first encounter with a shadow person, and soon others followed. They were unsettling, but they kept their distance, and I hardened myself against the fear. The nature of the visitations then began to shift into something far more intimate and invasive. In December of last year, a new phenomenon started. Every single night, I would feel the distinct 4-point pressure of a cat jumping onto the bed. I could feel its weight as it walked deliberately across the blankets to the foot of the bed, circled a few times, and then settled down, its body a warm, solid presence against my feet. I could even feel the deep, vibrating rumble of its purr through the mattress. We do not own a cat. The nightly ritual was so consistent and so real that it began to severely disrupt my sleep. Soon after, another presence joined it. I would feel the light, skittering sensation of tiny, fast-moving feet running across my legs and torso, sometimes daring to brush against my face. It was unnerving, a feeling of being explored by small, unseen things. The fear became a constant companion, a knot in my stomach that tightened every time the sun went down. The absolute breaking point came when something large began to join me in bed at night. It wasn't a weight at my feet, it was an immense pressure sinking into the mattress right beside me, the displacement of air as a massive, invisible form lay down. I was paralyzed with a level of fear I hadn't felt since I saw the Reaper. I could feel its presence, a silent, heavy energy next to me in the dark. Sleep became impossible. The chronic exhaustion and constant high-level anxiety began to take a severe toll on my health and my sanity. I knew I couldn't live like this. With my husband's support, I finally reached out to a team of paranormal investigators and spiritual cleansers, people who understood this world I had been straddling my entire life. I was desperate, expecting them to find a restless spirit or two. What they found left even them in a state of shock. The investigation revealed that my brand new home was not just haunted, it was a hive of spiritual activity. They identified numerous entities, poltergeists, multiple earthbound spirits with demonic attachments, a presence they identified as a reptilian, and several active portals to other dimensions. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. But amidst this terrifying revelation came a moment of clarity. The investigators explained that not all the spirits were malicious. They identified the phantom cat, the tiny, skittering fairies with their little feet, and the large, heavy presence in my bed as protective entities. They were my guardians, drawn to me to shield me from the darker forces that had congregated there. I am now taking classes, learning from these experts how to strengthen my own spiritual defenses, how to communicate with these beings, and how to close the portals that have made my home a spiritual crossroads. The cat still visits sometimes, a comforting weight in the night. My perspective has been irrevocably altered. The spirit world is not just real, it is a complex, chaotic, and ever-present reality, and I am no longer just its unwilling observer, but an active participant.
The night of November 3rd, 2020 was charged with a strange, ambient anxiety that had nothing to do with the paranormal. The world felt like it was holding its breath, and that tension seemed to seep through the walls and into my sleep. I woke up not to a sound or a nightmare, but with a sudden, jarring clarity, as if a switch had been flipped in my brain. The clock on my nightstand glowed with the numbers 3:17 a.m. My room was steeped in that deep, pre-dawn silence where the only sounds are the hum of the house and the rush of your own blood in your ears. I was on the top bunk, a metal-framed perch I'd slept in for years, high enough to feel a sense of separation from the world below. For a long time, I just lay there, staring at the textured ceiling, my mind cataloging the familiar silhouettes of my room, the lump of my desk chair, the stack of books on the floor, the faint orange glow from a streetlight filtering through the blinds. After what felt like half an hour of motionless waiting for sleep to return, I accepted its defeat. The feeling of being wide awake was too profound, too complete to fight. With a quiet sigh that was swallowed by the silence, I began to push myself up, my palms flat against the cool mattress. The movement was slow, deliberate, trying not to make the metal frame groan and wake my sibling below. I sat there for a moment, my legs still under the covers, letting my eyes adjust more fully to the deep shadows. My gaze drifted towards the foot of the bed, where the ladder was fixed, my only route to the floor. It was in this casual, unfocused glance that I first registered something was wrong. There was a shape there, a patch of darkness that didn't belong. At first, my brain, still half-tethered to the logic of sleep, tried to categorize it. Was it a pile of clothes I'd left on the floor, a trick of the shadows cast by the furniture? But it wasn't on the floor. It was standing. It was a figure, roughly human in height and build, but it possessed no features, no texture, and no discernible clothing. It was a silhouette. But that word is inadequate. A silhouette is a shadow cast upon a surface, but this was a three-dimensional object of pure, featureless black. It was a void, a hole cut into the fabric of my room. Perplexed and driven by a scientific curiosity that momentarily overrode any sense of fear, I leaned forward slightly, squinting, trying to force my eyes to resolve the image into something rational, something that made sense. The moment I leaned in, two things happened simultaneously that shattered my composure. First, I was hit by a palpable sensation that was not a sound or a sight, but a feeling. The air in the room grew heavy, and a low-level static seemed to prickle at my skin. It was the undeniable, instinctive knowledge that I was not just looking at an object, but that I was in the presence of another consciousness, and that it was aware of me. The second thing was a simple, logical observation that was more terrifying than any feeling. Directly behind the figure, there was a bookshelf against the wall filled with brightly colored book spines. I knew its exact location and appearance, but from my vantage point, I couldn't see it. The figure was not transparent like the shadow, it was solid, opaque, physically blocking my line of sight. It was really, truly there. The transition from intellectual curiosity to primal terror was instantaneous and absolute. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, flooded my stomach and spread through my limbs, turning them to lead. My breath hitched in my throat, and my heart began to hammer against my ribs with a force that felt physically painful. I was trapped. I was on the top bunk, 6 feet off the ground, and the only way down was past it. To scream felt pointless and somehow dangerous, as if any sound would provoke it into action. What would I even say? What could my family do against a pillar of solid nothingness? My mind, which I had always trusted as a bastion of logic and reason, offered no solutions, no explanations. It simply screamed in silent, looping panic. I was a scientist observing an impossible phenomenon, and the only conclusion I could draw was that I was in mortal danger. In the end, stripped of all reason and left with only the instinct of a cornered animal, I did the only thing that felt possible. I chose denial. Slowly, with movements that felt agonizingly stiff and loud in the crushing silence, I turned away from it. I rotated my body until my back was facing the foot of the bed and laid my head down on the pillow, facing the wall. I pulled the covers up to my neck, creating a flimsy, useless barrier. And then I waited. I lay there, rigid and trembling, my eyes squeezed shut, listening with an intensity I didn't know I possessed. I listened for a footstep, for the sound of breathing, for any sign that it was moving closer. The wait was an eternity of sustained terror. Every creak of the house, every distant siren was a potential sign of its approach. I did not dare to look back. I just lay there, feigning sleep, a captive in my own bed. The first hint of dawn, a sliver of pale gray light that outlined my window blinds, was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. It felt like a rescue, a sign that the long, dark night was finally releasing its grip. I waited until the room was filled with a soft, hazy morning light, until I could clearly make out the posters on my wall and the texture of my blanket. My body ached from the tension of being held so rigidly for so long. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I forced myself to turn over. I looked towards the foot of the bed, my heart still pounding with residual fear. There was nothing there. The ladder was just a ladder, and behind it, solid and reassuringly real, was my bookshelf, its colorful spines exactly where they should be. I don't know how to describe what happened to me. I remain an atheist. I do not believe in ghosts or paranormal phenomena. But I also know that I was not tired, I was not dreaming, and that for several hours something impossible stood in my room, and a part of me is still lying on that top bunk, too terrified to look back.
In the geography of my youth, the space between my house and my best friend Amir's was a kingdom of its own. Its capital was a small, open-sided wooden hut, what we called a bongsal, that sat under the shade of a few banana trees. It was our sanctuary, a place of refuge from parental chores and the afternoon heat. In front of this hut stood the silent, ancient monarch of our kingdom, a colossal jackfruit tree. It was old, its bark gnarled and scarred like the skin of an old man, and it rarely offered up fruit anymore. Its branches, however, stretched wide and high, creating a dense canopy that plunged the ground below into a perpetual twilight. This was our world. After school and long into the evenings, we would sit on the bongsal's worn floorboards, the tiny screens of our PSPs casting a glow on our faces, the sounds of digital combat mixing with the symphony of the kampung night, the incessant chirping of crickets, and the distant bark of a dog. Our routine was comfortable and predictable, which is perhaps why the night it was broken remains so vividly etched in my memory. It was one of those thick, humid nights, the kind where the air feels heavy in your lungs. We were 14, an age where you feel invincible, and the night seems to hold endless possibilities. We had finished playing games and were just talking, our voices low in the late hour, which must have been around 11. The single fluorescent bulb of the bangsal hummed above us, attracting a frantic cloud of moths. It was Amir who broke the easy silence. He suddenly sat up straight, his head cocked to one side. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his eyes fixed on the impenetrable darkness of the jackfruit tree. I laughed it off, assuming it was the start of one of his elaborate ghost stories designed to spook me before my short walk home. "Hear what, the wind?" I teased, but he shook his head, his face suddenly serious, and that was the first cold flicker of unease I felt. I fell silent, straining my ears to listen past the crickets. At first there was nothing. Then I heard it. It was faint, almost woven into the texture of the night sounds, but it was undeniably there. It was not the wind, nor was it an animal. It was a voice, a deep, masculine baritone that seemed to resonate not from a single point, but from the very heart of the tree itself. It wasn't speaking words I could understand. It was more of a low, monotonous chant or a mournful, forgotten song. The sound vibrated in my chest, a deeply unsettling resonance that felt ancient and wrong. My earlier amusement evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. We sat frozen on the wooden planks, two boys suddenly made very small by a sound that didn't belong in our world. Our eyes locked on the dark, tangled branches from which the voice emanated. That's when we saw it. My eyes, trying to pierce the gloom, caught a flicker of movement high up in the branches. It wasn't a swaying leaf. A shape detached itself from the deeper shadows, and for a moment my brain refused to process what it was seeing. It had the rough form of a large ape, hunched and powerful, but it was far too large, easily the size of a fully grown man. Its form was a solid, impenetrable black, a void that seemed to drink the moonlight, making it stand out against the slightly paler darkness of the leaves. And then it turned its head towards us, and we saw its eyes. They were not the reflective shine of an animal's. They were 2 points of brilliant, self-luminous white light, like burning embers, devoid of any pupil or warmth. They stared down at us with a cold, malevolent intelligence that stripped the air from my lungs. The physiological reaction to pure terror is something you can't comprehend until you experience it. A wave of ice washed over my skin, raising goosebumps so sharp they were painful. My vision swam, the edges turning dark as a dizzying faintness threatened to overwhelm me. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and the only anchor I had was the sight of that thing in the tree and the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. The low chanting from the tree had stopped, replaced by a silence that was somehow more terrifying. The creature didn't move, it just watched us, its glowing eyes a fixed point in the swaying branches. The paralysis lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity before a shared, unspoken understanding passed between Amir and I. It was a single, primal instinct: flight. We didn't scream, we didn't say a word, we just scrambled off the bangsal and ran. We sprinted in opposite directions, a frantic, panicked flight back to the perceived safety of our homes. I don't remember my feet touching the ground on the short path back to my house. I burst through the door, slammed it shut, and leaned against it, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. The aftermath was almost as harrowing as the event itself. Amir developed a high fever the next day, a common reaction in our culture to extreme shock or a close brush with the supernatural, a damam terkejet. He was delirious for a day, muttering about the glowing eyes in the tree. When he recovered, the carefree confidence in his eyes was gone, replaced by a haunted, skittish watchfulness. I too was changed. Sleep offered no escape, as the image of that solid black form and its burning white eyes was seared onto the inside of my eyelids. When I finally gathered the courage to tell my mother what we had seen, I expected skepticism, perhaps a gentle scolding for being out so late. Instead, her face grew pale, and she looked at me with a grave seriousness that frightened me more than any disbelief could. She told me that she had seen it too, many years ago, not in the tree, but perched on the roof of the very same bangsal, its dark form silhouetted against the moon. She explained that others in our village had seen it over the generations. The consensus was that it was a Saka, an inherited, powerful spirit that had once belonged to a family that lived in an abandoned house deeper in the woods. When the last of the family died, the spirit was left untethered, a masterless entity that haunted the grounds it had once been bound to protect. The bangsal and the old jackfruit tree were now its territory. We never sat there at night again. Our kingdom had been overthrown, and its silent, watching monarch was something we never wanted to see again.